Hello and welcome into Fantasy Focus Football presented by NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. My name is Daniel Dopp and I am joined by my three best friends today. We're a little tired, but we're here. Liz Loza, Stephania Bell, and Yates coming out of the fantasy marathon. Guys, we did 4 hours of television, helping people get ready for their fantasy drafts, making sure they know all the good stuff. Field, I thought it was a ton of fun. Did you have fun last night?
I had a blast last night. I had an absolute joy with.
You look nice, suited up too here today.
It was funny you mentioned that because some people are probably saying to themselves, like, why is Field dressed up? Like, is he doing TV today? That's true. But more importantly than that is this. Last night, during these 4 hours of TV, I watched a gentleman on my TV have the audacity to wear a T-shirt and change that T-shirt multiple times. Sick to my stomach watching you change your T-shirt on national TV. A T-shirt. What is this, like, like amateur hour?
Yeah, I guess so. I guess I'm allowed to wear jeans and T-shirts to work, and maybe that's a big deal. I don't know.
I do love it. Like, I swear to God, the internet will find something to get pissed off about.
Vitriol that you know what?
Did you get...
Oh, I got a guy coming after me talking about how unprofessional that I was wearing jeans and T-shirt on TV and how on his work from home, he wears nicer clothes when he works from home than I do.
Congratulations.
Waist up.
Yeah, so.
Whatever. He's jealous that he doesn't get to be on TV.
I think that's what it is. Also, I want to just spread good music. All those bands, you know what I mean? They're good people.
They all got shout outs.
That's right.
They also, I was just thinking about this. Like, is there anything in life, and I can only think of two things that have a universal approval rating? Like when I say like no one's going to get mad about those things, I can think of just two things.
I can't.
Can you think of anything?
No. Puppies.
Puppies?
Oh, that's a good one.
All right, that might be a good one.
It'll be.
I was going to go with Liz and Stefania.
Oh, there you go. That's good, Field. That's good.
Over to my feed. Right. That is not true.
Well, we were getting people ready for drafts last night. Over 800,000 drafted teams is about where we left it last night. I've got a draft going on right now, the Crappy Bands You Never Heard of League. And Field and I.
You have a draft right now?
Yeah, we're doing a slow draft as it happens right now. Everyone's out on tour, so it makes it easy to like make a slow draft like that. But
Wait,
Field,
are they actually band members?
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's a league full of band guys. So it's a ton of fun. Yeah. And Field, you and I have our Michigan Men League tomorrow night that we're drafting for. But I think the league everyone is waiting to hear about is the Veterans League, because we are bringing it back, baby. It was so much fun last year to be able to do it. It was fantastic. If you were in the Veterans League, go to ESPN.com/vet fantasy leagues to sign up. ESPN.com/vet fantasy leagues, VET fantasy leagues to sign up. It was so much fun last year, man. It was a blast.
To be clear, because the bottom of the screen says league, not leagues. At the end, it's leagues, not league, right?
That's a great question.
I'm going to confirm this. You keep talking.
Fields is going to head on over to his phone. We're going to find out where you actually need to go for this. But honestly, this was one of the best leagues, Stephania, I felt like we did last year. Being able to be in a league with all these veterans, it was such a fantastic time.
Well, you, as a veteran, absolutely
appreciate that.
Built around you. And my father was a veteran, and we love to honor service members, past and present, on
100%.
our show. And also, we've talked about how popular we know fantasy football is amongst that community. And I've told the story before about when my friend was the commander of the USS Truman, and we were out on the ship, and everybody wanted to ask me fantasy football questions. Like, here I am fascinated by what they're doing, like saving and protecting our country. And they're like, so what do you think about Le'Veon Bell? I think it was back in the Le'Veon Bell days, asking questions. And I was shocked, but they were saying this was something that really connected them with home.
Yeah.
And they really, that was important to them to stay involved in their fantasy football league.
You were saving and protecting their fantasy teams if you told them not to draft Le'Veon Bell with that one. Field, do we have an official website?
Yes, confirmation. ESPN.com/vet fantasy leagues. Plural at the end. By far the best thing we've done here on the podcast in a long time is the Veterans League last year. Had an absolute blast with it. 16 teams in a league, so it's tough, but man, was it fun. And unsurprisingly, the trash talk was beyond a
yeah.
It was amazing.
It's also a really hardcore league. Like, I did not do well in my group.
No, it was tough.
They crushed me.
These people are locked in for sure.
I've told this story a couple times before, but we're in our draft, and draft chatter amongst people that don't know each other, at least not personally, like, can go a lot of different directions. I think it typically defaults to, like, just making this up here. Oh, you got Justin Jefferson with pick 9, like nice value there, right?
Yeah.
We had a little bit of niceties at the beginning of my draft, and then someone made one single pick in like the third round.
Floodgates.
And the league was like,
Yeah.
you on drugs? Like, oh my God, that was a terrible pick. This poor person was like having to defend the honor. I'm like, I was like, yeah, I kind of like it myself.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know. Like, it was ruthless. I loved it. So
Yeah, they're
can't
not
wait for this year.
Not afraid to come after each other, a couple of veterans or not. I mean, you've sort of earned that right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it sort of works that way. But definitely go check it out. VetFantasyLeagues.com, ESPN.com/VetFantasyLeagues. It's going to be a ton of fun. All right, let's get things kicked off with the opening drive. We got news the other day that Gardner Minshew was going to start at the quarterback position for the Raiders. I think we're a little bit more excited about this news, though. The Commanders have officially said Jayden Daniels is going to be their starter week one. Field, it felt like this was obviously going to be the thing. They just waited, unlike the Chicago Bears, to say, yeah, we're going to start Caleb Williams. They slow played it for us.
I actually didn't know that they hadn't previously named him the starting quarterback.
Right.
I thought that took place on April 25th when they drafted him second overall, and the depth chart includes Marcus Mariota as the safest competition. Here's what I will say about this is we all knew it was coming, yada, yada, yada. There was a very important stat that we used last night during the show that I think is worth repeating today, and I probably will use a lot up until the season.
Okay.
Last year, the top 4 rushing quarterbacks all finished with three of them finished with over 20 fantasy points per game. Justin Fields is a lone exception. He was a little bit lower than that. But the top 3 scoring quarterbacks in all of fantasy were all amongst the top 4 rushing quarterbacks, right?
Yep.
Great rusher, great fantasy quarterback.
Yep.
Meanwhile, the top 4 passing quarterbacks in terms of passing yards, the highest any of them averaged on a points per game basis was 18.5 fantasy points. You can be an elite sniper passing quarterback. And if you don't run, it's a problem. Jayden Daniels, excellent runner. That gives him such a huge, huge ceiling in fantasy football this year.
Yeah, really excited to see what he is going to be. We say it every single time that we talk about it, but rushing is a cheat code in fantasy. Jayden Daniels is going to continue to be that guy. Super excited to see what he's going to be for the Commanders so far this year. All right, we got more coming up later on in the show. Mock drafts galore. We're going to take you through what we would do in some of our situations. We're going to be back right here on Fantasy Focus. All right, back here on Fantasy Focus, Daniel Dopp, Liz Loza, Stephania Bell, and Field Yates. Guys, we have our huge mock draft tonight that we're doing as a part of the Fantasy Football Marathon. But we've been doing mock drafts all summer, to be honest. I think that we all know exactly where everyone wants to go. We all kind of have our own players we have gravitated towards. I want to go round by round and just kind of have a conversation when we're looking at these different rounds, where you guys are going based on the value, based on your strategy, and based on where you're picking, because that has a heck of a lot to do with it, right? So I want to throw up a full screen here. We're going to look at the ADP of the first round for those that are listening at home. And I'm kind of in this same boat as we look at this. CMC, Tyreek, CeeDee Lamb, Breece Hall, Bijan. Those are the top 5. Amon-Ra, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, A.J. Brown, and Jonathan Taylor round out 6 through 10. I've come around to the thing, if I'm drafting at the top of a draft like Mike has talked about, and I am tonight, I have the number 1 overall pick, I feel like I got to go running back early. One of those top guys. I understand you can maybe be a little different, take one of the wide receivers, but I've come around on the idea of grabbing a top 3 running back with one of my early round picks. Field, I know you're also early on in the draft. Is that a strategy that you also think you might follow, or are you just going to say, you know what, best player available because all these guys are stinking good in the first?
Yeah, my top 5 looks a little bit different than Mike Clay. I do have more wide receivers closer to the top. And let's be clear, it's the first round after Christian McCaffrey, right? We're talking about picks 2 through 10, not 1 through 10, because basically every draft that I have been a part of or will see will have Christian McCaffrey going number 1.
Well, I think this is interesting. Since you mentioned that, have you looked at the number of players that have been drafted number 1 overall in fantasy football in their recent finishes? The great Mackenzie Kramer just came out with a stat. We're also going to be able to throw this up. If you look at the guys that were drafted number 1 overall in the last handful of years, 2023, Justin Jefferson finished outside the top 30 at wide receiver. In 2022, Jonathan Taylor finished outside the top 30 at running back. In 2021 and 2020, Christian McCaffrey, Stephania, you know this all too well, got banged up both those years, finished outside the top 30. The last time a guy finished top 10 at his position that was drafted number 1 overall was Saquon Barkley in 2019.
All right, so one bone to pick here. What is the common thread amongst the guys that didn't pay off value there?
Injuries.
So if you want to forecast an injury for Christian McCaffrey, or if you're super concerned about the calf, then go ahead and do it. I'm following Stephania's guidance there. Like, if you look at everybody else that stayed healthy there, that player generally paid off, right? So the risk is the risk that I would say every player incurs, right? Like if you don't take Christian McCaffrey 1, but you instead get Breece Hall 2, like, I mean, Breece Hall, like, tore an ACL as a rookie, right? Does that mean that you shouldn't have taken it? So I totally get the research is the research. Those are numbers. Those are hard, stone cold facts right there. I will just say this, is that if I had the number 1 pick, well, I could go to court and argue for somebody not named Christian McCaffrey. Every opportunity that I will have to have the number 1 pick this year, which I've got a couple of lotteries left over, so I don't know if I will be taking Christian McCaffrey.
Okay, that's fair. Liz, you're right in the middle of the draft for this one. It's sort of, you're at a spot where if one of the running backs falls, are you looking at one of those early running backs, or do you think one of those early wide receivers when you're kind of talking 4, 5, 6, 7 in that range?
I don't think it's going to happen tonight, right? Like if I was a betting person, and maybe I am.
Maybe you are every once in a while.
I would not anticipate at the 5 spot getting either Breece Hall or Bijan Robinson.
Yeah.
I really like Bijan Robinson. I think he's going to smash the 52% opportunity share that he managed last year. And Breece Hall averaged over 17 fantasy points per game last year, despite facing a stacked front for nearly 20% of his touches. So I think we can say that he's pretty efficient. And that was, with a carousel of quarterbacks that we're expecting to be more stabilized with the presence of Aaron Rodgers. So yes, I would love one of those 3 running backs. Probably not going to get him.
Probably not.
So I might end up with, such a travesty, Tyreek Hill, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Justin Jefferson.
Those are all good names.
Do not
in
say
fantasy
CeeDee
football.
Lamb there. Is that because
I think you're going to take him?
Oh, okay. I think the first 5 picks, I feel pretty good about those being the 5 names. You disagree? Like in some order, Christian McCaffrey, Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall. If you were to make the first 5 picks on your own, would you include somebody and exclude one of those 5?
No, I think those are pretty much my same top 5. And I think you're right. And we have the benefit of seeing the patterns of how we've all drafted. It's really been, nobody's moved around much in those top 5.
Yeah.
It's kind of a tale of 2 halves in the first round.
Which is why,
You're at the
bringing
10
up the
spot.
rear in that first round. I'm kind of
At the
interested to
turn.
see who I've left, especially after our conversation last night about Jamar Chase and everybody getting nervous about his contract situation. I'm wondering, because who's before me? Adam at 8, and then who is at 9? Is it Damian Woody?
Yep.
So we were talking about everybody being nervous, and I could see both of them turning the page, and you start going, well, at what point? I'm still hanging on in the first round. It's hard for me to think about picking somebody who has seemed to indicate that he'd be willing to miss games. It's just too much of an investment. So it depends who I have there, which way I'll go, whether it be running back or wide receiver. I see on our, current ADP, we have Jonathan Taylor slotted there. I'd be happy with him. AJ Brown, I think, anyone anywhere around that. Derrick Henry's another running back I like right around there. So
Is there a world, Stephania, though, at the 10 spot, so you're going to pick back to back, you would go wide receiver? Or not, because as we've talked about for it feels like months now, the depth at the position that you get later?
Probably not for that reason. The thing is that I definitely, I covet one of those top tier running backs. So it makes me sad when I know I'm going to be outside that. But then there's a handful of running backs that I really like in the Jonathan Taylor, Derrick Henry range. And then I want to wait a long time. So I think to me, if I go wide receiver, I'm going to miss out on that.
Zero RB does seem to be the predominant strategy heading into this year.
It does. I want to look at round 2. Field, do you want to say something before we move on?
I just want to conclude on round 1 because I don't want to sound simple or narrow-minded when I say that, I'm taking Christian McCaffrey if I have the opportunity, because it's probably I only have a few lotteries left over, and I might get just one, if any, number 1 overall pick. So I'm leaning towards Christian McCaffrey. I've also been doing this long enough, and we all have seen a million things that tell us that crazy stuff happens in fantasy football. Unpredictability is the name of the game. If I'm not taking Christian McCaffrey, if you're trying to convince me who I should be taking, there are 2 names that come to mind. To me, the most out of those 5 that we have talked. Number 1, Bijan Robinson. And I just want to make this, and this is going to sound like the least nuanced fantasy football advice you guys will ever get. Special football player. For as great as Breece Hall is, and this is going to sound negative Breece Hall, it's more positive Bijan Robinson. I think in a vacuum, if we were just building the skill set, who is the more complete, talented player, I lean towards Bijan, right? I think he just has that kind of rare ability. And CeeDee Lamb. Just because the supernova season is so in play once again, right? The competition for targets is different than what Tyreek Hill faces in An offense that also includes Jalen freaking Waddle, who's awesome. And not that Tyreek hasn't feasted, but the possibility, the record for most targets in a single season is 206. Marvin Harrison back in the heyday with Peyton Manning. I think CeeDee Lamb has the most credible case to break that, even with one extra game factored in. So I want to make very clear, Bijan has crazy, ridiculous, number one overall player in fantasy upside.
It's so funny. I wonder if we had gotten the season that we had hoped for out of Bijan in his rookie year. Like, would we be talking about 100%. Him being the number one overall pick? Because we would have had an opportunity to see that.
And we saw the flashes of it.
Right.
Yeah.
We know it's there. And I think people just, it's that recency bias of he just went under the radar because of his utilization, not because of anything that he did.
Yeah, it's not him. It's them that held him back.
Yeah.
Right?
It's not his fault is where we come back to. All right, let's go round 2 really quickly. Stephania, you talked about if you're at the turn, you're going to have to make that decision. A.J. Brown, Saquon Barkley, Jonathan Taylor, Puka Nacua, Garrett Wilson. When you throw up your picks 11 through 15, Saquon, Wilson, Nacua, Jahmyr Gibbs, Kyron Williams, and then 16 through 20, you got Derrick Henry, Isaiah Pacheco, Liz, who you love, Travis Etienne, Travis Kelce, and Chris Olave. At the top of the board, Stephania, you're at the turn. I mean, what do you do there at the end of the first, beginning of the second?
So here's the thing you have to think about. So if you are somebody who wants one of the top tight ends, if you want to, for example, take a Travis Kelce, or you decide that Sam Laporta is your preferred tight end, and you're at the turn like I am, you know that player's not making it back to you. So even though Travis Kelce shows up as number 19 here in ADP, if that's somebody you really want on your roster, you have to take him at the turn, because you're not going to see picks
not going to make
again.
it all the way back.
You're not going to get him at the end of the third round when you pick again. So for me, I like being at the turn because I can sort of set the tone if there's somebody I really want to target. And I don't mind everybody saying, oh, you drafted him way too early. Because if I know I want that player, that's a strategy I'm using to make sure that player's on my team.
Are you using Travis Kelce as an example of a player that you would reach on, or do you specifically say that you would like to take Travis Kelce potentially?
No, that's an example.
An example of the situation.
Because we've talked about tight end and the depth at the position, but there are a couple of tight ends. And Travis Kelce based on history, Sam Laporta based on what we saw in his rookie season, what we think can happen this year. We know they're going earlier in drafts. Yeah. We know that they will likely not make it all the way back.
So let me ask, I think this is interesting though. That was in general, but to be more specific and not to try to reveal your draft plans for tonight, but do you kind of waive? So I agree with what you just said in the sense that I don't believe if you're picking 10th or 9th in a 10-team league, you are getting either of, I think it's possible but unlikely that you get Laporta / Travis Kelce. So I'm okay with waving the white flag on those two players if I pull the 9 or 10 spot in a 10-team league.
Agreed.
Because I believe the depth at this tight end spot. And I know Daniel can't stand Travis Kelce.
Oh.
Yeah, as we learned yesterday.
I love Travis Kelce, but I am a little.
Yeah, I hear you. Are you of the mind that this is the year where you can tap into the depth, or do you think that those two are still a cut above the rest and worth paying the premium on?
It's funny. I kind of went both ways when we were doing all the mock drafts, because I just wanted to see how the rest of my roster looked if I invested that early. And
Stephania, that's the point of mock drafting. Thank you for saying that, because you need to see how the roster plays out when you do different scenarios, different strategies. That's why we mock draft.
You mock?
Exactly.
It's research.
I love it.
We don't just preach it. We actually,
practice
we actually put it into practice, and that's what I did. And I didn't always love how my roster ended up when I went that early with a tight end. So, and it's funny to me too, how different it is with a 10-team league and a 12-team league.
Yeah.
Like, I think that makes a big difference to me, because I think it just levels the playing field a little bit more when you have a 12-team league if you make a jump early.
Yep.
So for me, probably in a 10-team league, I'm less inclined to make that reach, but I have no problem with somebody who does, because that's a player that they really want.
I just, we talk about Travis Kelce being the top, and he did average the most fantasy points per game last year. But quick stat, 34 non-quarterbacks registered more fantasy points per game than Kelce did in 2023.
Right. Wow.
So you are still giving up incredible production at other positions when drafting the presumptive tight end 1 overall.
Love it.
He's no longer lapping the field, and he's also no longer lapping a lot of other premium players. If last year's consistency from Travis Kelce holds.
If that was going to say, because there are many more years of Travis Kelce being at peak value.
Right.
And probably that stat doesn't probably hold up for the 3 years. I don't know.
No, it definitely doesn't.
And so if you go back 2 years when Travis Kelce had so many points, he was clearly a league winner.
Yep.
Is this an indication of decline, or was that an outlier last year and you get the bounce back of Kelce this year?
Both. I think it's both. I think it is him like a slight dip in production, becoming a 35-year-old player this year, while the rest of the position.
35 is old.
You age us, guys. You age us.
While the rest of the position finally comes on, the gap between him and everyone else was what it was about. But with the rest of the position growing there, I think we're in a spot
I feel much stronger about this stance, that the rest of the position is catching up to Travis Kelce, than I do that Travis Kelce is going to decline further this year. That part I don't know. Because I, crazy enough, I'm not going to bet against the Chiefs this year.
That's fair.
Last year, though, you said something and it stuck with me, and that was that you'd rather be
year too late than a year too early.
Correct. And so that stance this year, though, remains the same. But the point you're making is that there's been an influx of talent.
There has been. There's been a lot. And there are guys that I love, whether to Trey McBride, David Njoku, Jake Ferguson, even going all the way down to tight end 10. From 1 to 10, I feel pretty good about the values there. And while I have made my case about why George Kittle can be, he's an inconsistent player for fantasy, not real life. You guys, ridiculous, right? But 10 games last year with 3 or fewer catches for George Kittle.
Yep.
If you're getting him in the 8th or 9th round, it's like, so what? Like that's still fine. But just as a general rule of thumb in round 2, good values all the way around. Like that's hard to screw up round 2 based off how the ADP data is shaking out.
A lot of really good running backs still, a lot of really good wide receivers. All right, let's take a look at round 3 when we do this. Fields, you and I are going to kind of be back-to-back here, round 2 and round 3. If I'm going running back early, you're probably going running back early. I get a chance to take a look at guys like Marvin Harrison Jr., Devontae Adams, Patrick Mahomes, first quarterback off the board at 20. ADP is 28.6. Then you got Michael Pittman and Josh Allen. Picks 26 through 30, Joe Mixon, Sam Laporta, Jalen Hurts, Mike Evans, James Cook. I'm going to say this, Field Yates.
Yep.
I'm not taking a quarterback in the 3rd round. This is too early for me based on the mock drafts that we've seen and how deep the position is. Am I crazy to say that?
No, round 3 is a decision round. Round 3 is where you have to decide whether you want to be the person that likely starts the train, right? I saw Travis Kelce going 19.4 in terms of average draft position right now, but it might, in a lot of drafts, be closer to the middle of the second. And you have to decide, do you want to start the train? My general stance, given all the depth of the position this year at both quarterback and tight end, is to not start the train, let somebody else do it, and be happy to draft, and I'm just making this up here, a Joe Burrow, Joe Burrow and David Njoku, Dak Prescott and Jake Ferguson, whoever it might be, rather than being the person that pulls the trigger early on a quarterback at 24 and a tight end at 28.
Yeah, I'd rather load up at wide receiver or running back still here in the 3rd round. One of the big questions I got, though, Liz, we've got a guy back-to-back in ADP, Marvin Harrison Jr., the highest-rated rookie wide receiver that we've had in the last 20 years, or Devontae Adams, maybe the best wide receiver that we've seen in football over the last decade. When you're looking at this, how do you decide between that rookie upside and a guy that has been a veteran just juggernaut at the position?
It is a fair point, and Mike Clay isn't on the show today, so I'm not going to get any bonus points. But I feel like I would like Marvin Harrison Jr., not because I necessarily think he is going to definitely outproduce Devontae Adams, but because I agree with the strategy that Field talked about yesterday, which is why not swing for the fences in the first half of this draft when you can recognize all of the depth, particularly at wide receiver, that you have later on in the draft. So yeah, I'm gonna shoot my shot, if you will, early and hope for the best.
I like it.
Who has, and this is just a one-word answer, and I'll go all the way around, who has a better shot to be a top 5 fantasy receiver this year? Marvin Harrison Jr., Devontae Adams. My vote, Marvin.
Marvin.
Jr.
I think Marvin Harrison Jr.
To me, that's the answer in round 3. Like, just shoot your shot, go big. You don't get points for finishing 3rd in fantasy football, right? This is not, I don't know. What do you get points for finishing 3rd? The Olympics. It's not the Olympics, right?
There you go. Yes.
Bronze. Yes.
We want
to go for gold here, baby.
Love it. All right, we got more coming up on Fantasy Focus Football just in a little bit. All right, now it is time for Dynamic Duos presented by NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. We talked about some of our favorite stacks a couple of weeks ago, guys, at the quarterback position. It's tough not to find someone better than Dak Prescott given the value and how late he is going in drafts. You pair him with a guy like CeeDee Lamb. If you have one of the early picks like you and I do, Field, do you think that there is a better wide receiver quarterback duo in fantasy football, given their ADP and everything you can get from these two guys?
That last or second to last line is probably the most important part, right? Because Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown are a better fantasy duo, right? My second-ranked quarterback and my sixth-ranked wide receiver, as opposed to my seventh-ranked quarterback and my first-rated wide receiver being Dak and CeeDee. It's hard to go really wrong here, but the difference is, of course, you're getting Dak in a 10-team league in the 8th round. Right, we just saw the data. Jalen Hurts is going in the 3rd round. You can get a comparable value because you know who finished just behind Jalen Hurts in fantasy points last year amongst quarterbacks?
Dak Prescott.
So you're getting a discount of 4 to 5 rounds on Dak. And, you know, Dak is one of those fascinating quarterbacks because there is no middle ground stance on Dak Prescott. You have to either believe that he is the worst and a choke artist in the playoffs and not worth the money, or that the Cowboys are insane for not having a deal done yet. We're talking fantasy football, people, and the numbers support Dak. Over the past 5 seasons, he's had 3 fully healthy years, one in which he missed 12 games. I think it was a thumb injury, and then one in which he missed 4. The year in which he missed 4, the numbers are comparable, but they're prorated, so I'm going to ditch those for just a moment. 3 full seasons in the past 5. This is the average for Dak. 4,300 passing yards. Good, right?
That's real good.
Elite.
That's nice.
34.3 passing touchdowns.
Anything over 30 is nice.
Yeah, that's ridiculous. That's like potentially leads the NFL good. 200 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. Dak, you can debate him until the cows come home about other things. But in fantasy football, when he plays, he's a stud. And it's not like he's like, you know, slow and steady wins the race, Dak Prescott. It's he can carry your team for a month and a half. He did it last year.
Sure.
He was the best player in fantasy football.
Outlier, though. It was like nearly, 600 pass attempts, 590 pass attempts that propelled him into the top 3. Meanwhile, 3.2 rushing yards, QB 25 for rushing.
So you're not as in on Dak, you're saying.
I feel like I hear all the stats, and I'm not denying that he isn't an incredible duo and an incredible value, but we just talked about at the top of the show how rushing quarterbacks have such a higher floor, and yet 3.2 rushing yards per game, QB 25, that doesn't make me feel optimistic about...
Dak was down to 3.2 rushing yards per game last year?
I mean, maybe it's 30.2.
I don't think it's 30.2. I don't think it's 3 either. Maybe I've let me go check my numbers here.
We're gonna look at some stuff. While you guys are looking some stuff up, Stephania, I want to ask you this question. We've heard Adam Schefter talk back and forth a lot. Both of these guys are trying to pry the bag away from Jerry Jones right now. Sounds like one of them may be able to get it done. And when you look at this, is there any reason that you're concerned about either CeeDee Lamb or Dak Prescott in fantasy, given the contract situations?
Not because of what Adam Schefter told us last night, what Field's been saying all along, which is that we expect the deal to get done with CeeDee Lamb. Yeah. So I'm not worried about that, especially as we're approaching fantasy right now. Like, we have hesitations on Jamar Chase because of his situation, but CeeDee Lamb, we're all like ready to draft him as we expect this to get done. So I think the vote of confidence based on what they've been telling us is there. I just wanted to say for CeeDee Lamb, what's interesting to me, you know, a lot of there's feel too to this, right? And CeeDee Lamb to me doesn't feel like Tyreek Hill and Justin Jefferson, because they feel to me like such big play players. And CeeDee Lamb feels like volume, but that's the point, right? That's where Dak shines, and that's where CeeDee Lamb shines, is in the volume. He is his target preference. And I don't know if you guys remember last year, the very start of the season, CeeDee Lamb was not happy.
Yeah.
Did not think he was getting thrown the ball enough.
Yeah.
Had some words with Dak. And do you remember what happened after that?
He got the ball enough.
The ball a lot.
Yes, and it exploded, and they were like, okay, this works. To me, that was just a really great example, too, of the kind of chemistry that they have, and that's not going to change. So yes, CeeDee Lamb will make the big plays, but I also think you benefit in these PPR formats from the volume. I think he will catch more passes, to Field's point about him potentially setting that record for receptions this year. The volume is going to earn you extra fantasy points.
Love that.
It was the rushing volume that I was wrong.
That's what I was just going to ask you, Liz.
Rushes, 14.2 rushing yards.
Okay.
QB 25 in rush attempps, QB 28 in rushing yards per
so
game.
it's even worse. All right, so I should have just not fact-checked.
Yeah, you should have. Exactly.
So maybe Dak is one of those outliers in the sense that the passing totals are so ridiculous that he can largely overcome it. We have seen Dak get scorching hot, though, on enough occasions that I'm digging. Like, as amazing as CJ Stroud was last year in real life, for fantasy, relative to how he performed in real life, it was not quite as daunting. Remember, we had that spirited debate on the show last year with Kevin Pulsifer, the great Kevin Pulsifer, about CJ Stroud versus Patrick Mahomes.
I remember this.
And I want to say that Stroud ended up winning it.
You mean Daniel ended up winning it?
Daniel, yes. But it was like, not like either one of them. It was not like, hey, all of a sudden Stroud averaged 28 points per game and Mahomes was stuck at 17. It was like Stroud gets 18.2 and Mahomes gets 17.6. Remember that season in which Dak got hurt after week 4 or 5 when he was on pace to break every single passing record in NFL history? It was like he was on pace for 7,000 yards through 4.5 games. It was absurd. So I've seen it enough from Dak that the value of he and CeeDee Lamb, to me, is the most compelling quarterback wide receiver stack. If Jamar Chase had a contract, I would introduce Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, even with the concerns that Stephania has shared, just because, again, of how late Joe Burrow is going.
Love it, Field Yates. All right, that was Dynamic Duos presented by NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. NFL Sunday Ticket and YouTube TV are the perfect pair for watching NFL games on Sunday. All right, back here in Fantasy Focus, Daniel Dopp, Liz Loza, Stephania Bell, and Field Yates. We're making our way to the mock draft show. Guys, let's talk about the middle rounds. Kind of feels like it's easy. We actually had this question at our Boston. Well, I should say this whole sentence before this. No. We had this question at our live show. Okay. I kind of feel like I know what to do in the early rounds. We all know the best players in the game. I can decide who I want to take. And actually, a lot of the late round guys, I know who I want because everyone has their favorite flyers or sleepers that we talk about, guys that but when I get in the middle rounds, it's like, which direction do I go here? Sometimes you're talking about veterans that are falling, and do I want to take that 30-year-old wide receiver? It's running back twos that maybe aren't in the best spot. So this middle rounds, 4 through 7, I think is where you get a lot of question marks for fantasy managers. Throwing up the full screens with what we got here. We're going to start in round 5.
Okay.
If you look at round 5, Mark Andrews, CJ Stroud, Deebo Samuel, Cooper Kupp, Ken Walker. And then 46 through 50, Devontae Smith, DJ Moore, Anthony Richardson, Trey McBride, and Jalen Waddle. Trey McBride all the way down here at 53.8 is one of the reasons why I'm not using an early round pick on either Travis Kelce or Sam Laporta, because he was unbelievable last year. Even Mark Andrews is in this range. Stephania, I want to tee this up to you. When you look at this 5th round, is there an area that you look at these guys and you say, I'm kind of leaning one direction over the other? Maybe pick 48 or so. I don't know.
I don't know, guys.
I know you
really
guys
like Kenneth Walker.
Yeah,
that's what it is.
First of all, I don't draft Seahawks. I try and avoid.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair.
Except for Jake Bobo, just for the record.
If for those who might not be aware, they are pointing out Anthony Richardson in that round for me.
Is that too high? 5th round. Are you comfortable taking Anthony Richardson as a 5th round quarterback?
I am totally comfortable with it because I think of the value that he brings. He is unique in terms of what he's going to bring you in the rushing yards. We've now made reference to this how many times about the importance of a quarterback who brings you the yards on the ground. And I'm not drafting him in round 2 or 3 like I am if I want to get Patrick Mahomes or Jalen Hurts, for example. So I may have been able to stack wide receiver and running backs and then come back and get my quarterback there. So I think it's interesting because you have a variety of positions in that round from what we saw in the full screen, right? You have running backs, you have tight ends. I think Mark Andrews, quietly, I think, forgotten about. And Mark Andrews at one point was rivaling Travis Kelce. And then the injury last year was problematic. And he came back for the AFC Championship. But a lot of people didn't really, he wasn't 100% then. I mean, he was there and he was able to play, but he wasn't really 100%. I think he's still super valuable and is a favorite target in the red zone for Lamar Jackson. And I think Mark Andrews still has the potential to be a top 3 tight end. But you can get him if you want still a top tight end, but you don't want to go round 2. You could get Mark Andrews, and I would consider that a value. So relative to other available tight ends, you can still wait and have a very strong tight end position. But I think he could finish as one of the top 3. I think he's likely to. And yet I don't have to pay the cost of a 2nd round pick.
Exactly. You can wait a little bit, get some more value at some other spots. Even here in the 5th round, guys. We're talking Jalen Waddle and Devontae Smith. I mean, these guys are still legit superstar wide receivers. And if anything happened to the guys in front of them, holy smokes, you're drafting a guy that could be a potential league winner for you in the 5th round, given what that could be. Liz, Stephania mentioned it. I mean, you could go quarterback, running back, wide receiver, or tight end. At this point, the whole board sort of opens up to you. Is there a direction that you like in the 5th round more than any other?
I think I'd probably end up going wide receiver because I think you have such solid options there. Devonta Smith attached to an electric offense and certainly a capable quarterback, DJ Moore, who has proven that he can produce regardless of the
QB
situation. And
Yep.
now that we have someone exciting in Chicago, we're hoping that ceiling certainly goes up despite having to share targets.
Wait, how does that ceiling go? Didn't he have a 49.5-point game last year? What are you looking for?
fine.
60 points?
Can I be optimistic about my
As a
team?
Bears fan, you can be optimistic. That's fair. You know what? I'm sorry to
moment
take
here?
that from you. You're right.
you.
As a former NFC North fan.
I'll say this about the mid rounds, and this is a little bit dependent upon the league size because obviously a deeper league means that this point will happen sooner in terms of rounding your draft. This is my strategy: is I find a line. And I would just, grab the top 300, grab the top 100, whatever list you can find on ESPN.com. They're all very printable, easy to see, easy to take in. And find a point where you say to yourself, all of a sudden I go from a guy that I would love to a guy that I need to be talked into.
Yeah.
Okay? And draw that line.
Mm-hmm.
It may be 10 players. It's probably a lot deeper than that. It may be closer to 45, 50 players. Because to your point, Jalen Waddle, Cooper Kupp, Kenneth Walker III, are you kidding me? In the 5th round of the 40s. I love all of those players a ton. Find that line. And up until the players in that line, above that line, have been exhausted, take good players. Take best players. Don't worry, well, I took 2 running backs early. I have to get a wide receiver. If you land on 3 running backs in the first 3 rounds because you absolutely love the value, you know what? You're going to have a running back surplus, and you're going to be everybody's favorite trade partner.
100%.
And you're going to turn that running back who is a really, really good player into a great receiver.
Yep.
So we tell people all the time, your first team is not your last team, not your championship winning team. Waiver wires, trades, the trade part really important here. So at some point, and I will define the mid rounds as the point where you have exhausted that list of players that you really want, but you haven't gotten to this big melting pot of players that represent similar value. It's going to take some things going right for them to hit. But if they do hit, they're going to have a ton of upside, whether it's a player like Rome Odunze or Khalil Shakir, players like that, right? So in that mid round, then you draft for need.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, I'm super wide receiver heavy. I got to hit a couple of running backs. Maybe it's boring, but I just drafted Zach Moss in the 8th round. Don't have a ton of confidence, but it's not like he's going to not play for Cincinnati. I'm just making that, I'm extrapolating that point a little bit there. So I like to identify that round where I'm like, no longer am I excited about this player. Once I've gotten there, I will start to hit needs. But draft for value early. There's so much you can do with your roster. The minute the draft is over, heck, I'm in a league with Stephania that drafted on Sunday night, this big-time flavor company league. And 30 seconds after the draft was done, I got a freaking waiver claim notification. Like, what sicko in this league is already getting remorse?
What did I miss?
It was an 18-round draft. Like, seriously, by the end of it, I was drafting retired players.
I know.
I was like, hey, congratulations, Tony Scheffler. You're my 5th tight end in this roster.
That's
You
so
played in
good.
8 years, but
All right.
you're awesome.
So let me ask you this question then. I want to throw up a full screen for round 6. And I want to see,
keep going, sorry.
does this get to a point in round 6 when you look at any of these guys where you have made that list, Field Yates, George Kittle, Joe Burrow, Malik Neighbors, Dalton Kincaid, and Aaron Jones, 51 through 55, 56 through 60, Zay Flowers, Evan Ingram, Ramondre Stevenson, Tank Dell, and Kyle Pitts.
Still
Any of
love
those
this.
guys that you're still like, I'm out. They're below my line.
Those guys we're getting closer there because I think what's happening though, Daniel, is that my line is a little bit deeper than this, but there are players that have risen higher in ADP than as an example. I think that's too early for Kyle Pitts. The best value, by the way, in this round is Malik Neighbors.
Totally with you.
I mean, in the 6th round, come on. I obviously have Marvin Harrison Jr. ranked higher. I'm very optimistic on Marvin Harrison Jr. But if you told me that Malik Neighbors has a Marvin Harrison Jr.-like season, would not surprise me at all. The best value in the 6th round. We have not yet reached my Mendoza line of drafting good players.
All right, so Malik Neighbors, Zay Flowers crushed it as a rookie. Tank Dell was unbelievable. Evan Ingram only set the most receptions at the tight end position in tight end history. Yep. And we think Dalton Kincaid is going to be huge.
Aaron Jones, too. I don't know what has happened there. I mean, I do know.
I do know
know what has happened. I do know what
Mike
has
talked about him.
That's correct. But Aaron Jones, do you have to look at how he finished this season? I don't know why. We talk about players who ended the season hurt. It's just fascinating to me how people are willing to forgive injuries on some players and not others.
It lasted all season.
No,
though.
it did not. He ended the season with 500-yard rushing games.
He did.
5 in a row.
Including
and
the playoffs.
He's ready to do a 6th.
Yep.
He did not. He had a hamstring injury early.
Week 1.
Yep, in week 1. And, find me running backs who haven't had early hamstring injuries. They're all over the place. We're seeing them in the preseason week 1. And the unfortunate part was that he thought it was mild. It took a little longer. So there was like this uncertainty thing happened for a few weeks. And he came back and then he injured his MCL. And he had an MCL injury a couple years previously, but he injured a different portion of the ligament. This guy is very smart, by the way. I actually talked to him about this for like half an hour when I was out at Vikings camp because he went through the whole analysis of why this MCL injury had taken longer, which he had referenced during the season, but I wanted, nerd that I am about this stuff, I wanted to get into it with him.
Professional that you are.
And he, but the thing is, he really understands his body, and he hit that reset button once he came back from that and got confidence in his knee again. Those 500-yard rushing games, that's where his mindset is right now. Now he's in a different offense. It's primarily a passing offense, although, things, we don't know exactly how it's going to shake out with Sam Darnold being the quarterback the whole year, et cetera. And he is a pass-catching running back. Like, he has value there, and he is the starter. So I just think that's a value position for Aaron Jones, who is going to be, he's going to be your RB2 at that position, and he will have weeks where he gives you that RB1 upside.
I just thought of something. We need to make a complete list of all the players that Mike and Stephania have argued about. Mostly based off of age. And we need to board bet them in aggregate. We need to each one gets a number.
I love it.
And at the end of the year, we are the loser of this collective board bet has to throw a 21st birthday party for the winner.
Oh, I like that.
Treat. I'll host it at my house.
Mike's
we can do it wherever you want.
this year, so we'll have a Mike Gets Old party while we're celebrating all the old players who had great
whatever
seasons.
you want.
You know what Mike's fantasy punishment should be?
A walker.
Karma. He gets what he deserves.
He gets what he deserves.
That's what I think.
Peters is what he should
Flashback
get.
to
Call back
last
to last night.
Yeah.
Get some ice bath is what he deserves. All right, we got more mock draft content coming up just after this. Back here on Fantasy Focus Football, Daniel Dopp, Liz Loza, Stephania Bell, Field Yates. I was waiting.
you forget?
I was waiting for you to turn and look at me, and I got no.
I was looking at my notes.
I was looking at my notes
I'm
too.
Intense.
All right, let's talk about a couple more rounds, guys. I think we finished off in the 6th round. Let's talk about the 7th. Now we're starting to get into those conversations, Field, I think, where you were telling us you got some lines here. Yep. I want to make sure I get some players before I get to a certain spot. When you look at the ADP for the 7th round in ESPN Fantasy, there's a handful of guys. We're going to throw it up on the screen here really quickly. Bunch of guys to look at. Calvin Ridley, T. Higgins, DeAndre Swift, David Montgomery. There's our guy, Dak Prescott. And then 66 through 70, George Pickens, Zamir White, James Conner, Jordan Love, and Keenan Allen. A definitive fall from some of the guys that we had in those earlier rounds. Liz, I want to ask you, when you look at the running back position here, are you comfortable leaving a draft with any of these guys as your RB2, or would you prefer to get someone a little higher than this as a guy that is your RB2?
No,
Are these flex plays?
I wouldn't. These are flex plays. Zamir White, I have mixed feelings about. We've talked on.
You and I have talked about it.
I don't mind Zamir White as a flex play, but I do not trust him in that Raiders offense as my RB2.
So Liz just drew the line, right? Because you're like, I don't mind him, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But I will take.
She's talking herself into it.
Like you said,
that's it.
I'm targeting Zamir White. You also notice something. If you were watching on the show there, what you would notice is that next to the players like rank in ADP, you saw his overall ADP, right? Mm-hmm. So Jordan Love, I believe, had the 69th highest ADP, but his average ADP was over 84. We're starting to see a bigger gap here, right? Yep. You're starting to see that as we get to a certain point in the draft, the variance of these players is much wider than early on, right? Like at the range for Christian McCaffrey is 1 to 1, or maybe 1 to 2 at worst,
1.5,
right?
Yeah.
So now you're starting to see people kind of open up the draft board a little bit. That graphic right there had a couple of talk me into those players, guys. So I think round 7, based off of the construct that I've been diving into, is about where we draw that line.
Yeah. Go ahead, Stephania.
I was just going to say that I don't mind James Conner there as an RB2 because James Conner.
You don't mind him, or you really like him?
I don't mind him.
Are they more in the line?
the line, but it's not like I would not pick him. Like I would be like, oh, I could still get him here. And the reason being that I think he is another forgotten one because we sort of built in that you expect him to miss a few games, but he's still an RB1 in a productive offense. And to me, if I get James Conner, I just make sure I get Trey Benson.
Yeah.
And that's sort of the plan. That's my insurance.
Now you're spending 2 roster spots to secure one.
Yeah, but I can
position.
get Trey Benson really, really late.
Sure,
I don't
it's still
mind
filling
that.
a roster spot, which I think is Fields' point, is that like now you're starting to make, you're making adjustments for a pick.
Yeah, but if we're at that point in the draft, aren't you doing that anyway?
A little bit.
A little bit.
Depending on the situation.
You
line
pretty
is
much have
approaching.
your structure filled out.
Yeah.
I just would say that, like, if I'm looking at those players, to me, like, I think that the ADP flashed, we had running backs like Zamir White and James Conner and DeAndre Swift, right? Mm-hmm. If I'm sitting there, like, the difference to me between a James Conner and some of the wide receivers that we saw in that same range right there might be as simple as, how does my roster look up to that point?
Exactly.
Right? If I haven't filled out a running back spot,
Right.
I'm taking James Conner. If I haven't filled out all my wide receiver spots and I'm concerned about the depth based off how the draft is shaking out so far, bam, I'm grabbing one of those wide receivers.
I'm more open to making accommodations for these players at this point.
That's where I'm at too.
Elsewhere in the roster and the bench.
I am mostly open to watching us tonight on ESPN from 7 to 10 p.m., being able to do this huge mock draft that we have coming up. We've been talking about it all day. I can't wait, honestly, for it to finally be able to get here.
Can't wait
It's
till
going to be
we
a
all
ton
go
of fun.
against our strategy.
Oh, it's going to be fantastic. It's going to be so great. Hey, thank you so much for hanging out with us. My name is Daniel Dopp, Liz Loza, Stephania Bell, and Field Yates. Thank you for watching Fantasy Focus Football presented by NFL Sunday Ticket on YouTube TV. We'll see you guys tonight.